As we go along, please adjust your color television carefully. To Van Gogh, color was everything. I'm Ed Herman. Most of this film takes place in the south of France during an explosive 15 months of activity, when in 444 days, Van Gogh painted 200 paintings and made 100 drawings. Ronald Pickvance.
Vincent was a compassionate, intelligent, understanding man. He was also irascible, tormented, and stubborn. He is the romantic image of the suffering artist, misunderstood, dying young, and virtually unrecognized. The drama of his life has sometimes distracted us from the greatness of his work. What we propose is to retell the story simply and look as deeply as possible into the paintings of Van Gogh.
Van Gogh had one lifelong friendship with his younger brother Theo, who supported him with small sums of money throughout his artistic career. Vincent died in July 1890, aged 37. 6 months later, Theo died, aged 33. Theo, said Vincent, was kind to painters. Vincent died of multiple causes: alcoholism, epilepsy, insanity. There have been many opinions, but nobody really knows.
He had premonitions that his working life would be brief. 10 years, he predicted. In fact, he was an artist for just 10 years.
Vincent was born and grew up in Holland. They said he was different. Not gifted, different. Besides Theo, he had another younger brother and 3 younger sisters. At 16, he had to choose a career. He worked unsuccessfully as an apprentice art dealer, a family profession. Influenced by his father, he tried to study for the church. He became an evangelist and lived among the poorest of the poor. That failed. At the age of 27, penniless, he made the totally unexpected decision to become an artist, encouraged only by Theo. Mother, he said, is a dear and narrow-minded old woman. He painted her some time later from a photograph. His father was the minister of a tiny Protestant church. The congregation numbered 20. Father believes in his own righteousness, Vincent wrote Theo. Reverend Theodorus said, I am always afraid that whatever Vincent does, he will spoil everything with his eccentricity, his queer ways and view of life. John Rewald, the art historian.
In his early years, Van Gogh exhibited really no promise. Vincent forced himself to draw against all his own awkwardness, and lack of talent.
He tried academies in Brussels, Antwerp, and Paris, and hated them. He was almost entirely self-taught.
Being a laborer, he said, I feel at home in the laboring class. He wanted to be a peasant painter, like Millet. The climax of his Dutch period, after many painted studies, was the Potato Eaters. He read a lot and loved Dickens. What Dickens does in words, he said, I do in paint.
Some found it sentimental, and people were shocked by its roughness. But that was intended. Vincent said, if a peasant picture smells of bacon, smoke, and potato steam, that's healthy. A peasant picture shouldn't be perfumed. Vincent felt happiest in country settings. One of the summits of his Dutch career is the beautiful autumn landscape.
He had mastered his craft. His brother Theo, now an art dealer in Paris, had written about a revolution in painting.
He had never seen an Impressionist painting. Where do you see Impressionist paintings in those days in Holland? Who had them? Where would he?
It was time to leave the land of Rembrandt and move on. He had 5 years left to live. Paris, 1886. The rooftops look about the same now. Vincent lived with Theo in Montmartre, then a village on the outskirts of Paris. 4 rooms and a kitchen on the 3rd floor. Theo introduced him to the leaders of the new art, the Impressionists Monet, Degas, Lautrec, Gogh.
The revelation of color was Paris, was Monet and Pissarro, mostly. He needed this eye-opener to be ready for Arles and for the much more violent color schemes he found there.
Vincent's style completely changed. Even his choice of subject matter was like the other Impressionists. A restaurant by the Seine. It could have been painted by almost anyone of the new school. And he fell in love with Japanese prints. He collected hundreds of them, and on 3 occasions he made painted copies. It gave him a new way of looking that stayed with him for life.
He became sick in Paris, from the weather, from too much drinking and clashing of egos, and too much smoking, he said. After 2 years, he had to move on again. He headed south, and after 15 hours on the train, got off in Arles, February 20, 1888, to the peaceful land of warmth and light. Like Japan, he said.
We're through now to the part of the town then where Vincent lived. We're standing on the square which is between the station and the old part of the town where he had his first lodgings. He came in to the station, the railway station, which is up the street behind us there, walked across the square here, which looked considerably better than it now does, because in the 1880s it wasn't a car park. He walked through the town gates, the Porte de la Cavalerie, and into the town to look for somewhere to live.
He found a simple hotel inside the walls. It was snowing. Just outside the walls, the Place Lamartine was to become the center of his life. Why Arles?
Van Gogh didn't really go to Arles, he just happened to arrive there. He wanted to go south. We had this vague idea.
26 miles up the Rhone from the Mediterranean, Arles used to be an important port. In the 1840s, the railroad saved it from decline. Vincent said, "It is a filthy town with its old streets." Today, it is a museum piece, an ancient town carefully preserved in the modern world. Around Arles is an extraordinary landscape. A great plain called the Gogh, as flat as Holland, with an ancient abbey overlooking it. Just 3 miles away.
N'est-ce pas, avec une tour?
Avec la tour. Ah,
Oui.
mais ça, c'est le château de Montmajour, ça.
Ah, c'est
C'est
ça.
des vestiges romains, ça.
Oui. Oui, oui,
C'est
oui.
des vestiges romains, ça.
Ah oui.
C'est même classé site historique.
Oui.
Or rather, no. The Abbey of Montmajour was founded in the 6th century. Vincent walked there often to admire the view. He would make quick pencil sketches and work over them with a reed pen to emulate the Japanese, he thought.
He walked a lot to improve his health and to find subjects to paint. He wrote to Gauguin, "I left Paris sick in heart and body. Now, new hope is breaking out on the horizon." It was like Holland in a warm sun, and he loved it. To save money, he made drawings instead of paintings. To build himself up, he tried to eat better. "If only I could get stronger soup in the hotel," he complained to Theo. But spring arrived and his health improved. He thought about the vague idea he had, which was to create a colony of artists in the South. A collective studio of painters to be our united strength against poverty and bad health.
He made some 14 orchard paintings to send to Theo for his dreamed-for house in the country. His style was changing again, and he apologized to his sister. "My brushstrokes have no system at all. I hit the canvas with irregular strokes, which I leave as they are. Patches of thick color, spots of canvas left uncovered. Maddening, I'm sure, to people with fixed ideas about technique." He was learning to be himself.
He made only one side trip, for 5 days, to the fishing village of Sainte-Marie on the Mediterranean. 5 hours on a bumpy road by diligence.
On his last morning, he dashed off this drawing in an hour, boasting to Theo that he didn't use his usual mechanical device for getting the perspective right. I just let my pen go, he said, fast and sure, like the Japanese. He wrote notes to himself about the colors and completed the painting back in Arles. He added the ships at sea from another picture.
He came back through the Camargue, a region famous for its wild white horses. As a northerner, he was astonished to discover that the harvest came in early June. He hurled himself into a frenzy of painting.
Incredibly, 10 harvest paintings in 10 days. But he worried that people would think he worked too fast. He told Theo, "I make complicated calculations that result in a quick succession of canvases, done quickly, but carefully worked out in advance." I think I know where he stood when he painted the one that he liked best. His first large canvas, size 30, about 2 by 3 feet. It shows the Abbey of Montmajour in the distance. He made 2 drawings first and worked on the painting for several days. "It kills all the rest," he said. The enchanting details are separate and isolated from each other. They all face in different directions, and yet they people the landscape harmoniously together. Working out the exact subject that Vincent painted and where he must have stood to do it is partly a hobby with me. But it's also useful scholarship. If you know what the reality is, you can see what the artist did to change it, and perhaps ask the question, why? One of his mottos was, exaggerate the essential and leave the obvious vague.
Vincent had never seen colors like these in the brilliant light of Arles. Brilliant colors were now available to artists in tubes. No one took advantage of this better than Van Gogh.
bolder strokes firmly applied. The painting was less literal, trying to say more with less.
Dear Theo, I must send you a new order for paints and canvas, rather a heavy one. What's really urgent is the canvas. My concentration has become more intense, my hand more sure. I can almost swear to you that my painting will improve. I work because I must, so as not to suffer too much mentally. Have you had any news from Gauguin? A good handshake. Many thanks for your letter and the 50-franc note. I have a terrible lucidity at moments these days, when nature is so beautiful. Nine kilometers from Arles was as far as Vincent walked, to the village of Fontpierre.
Vincent enormously admired Daumier, who drew ordinary people with the merciless insight of the cartoonist. He wanted to recreate people as Daumier could, swiftly, in a few strokes. A quick sketch of Patience Escalier, peasant, folded in half and sent to Bernard in a letter.
I'm working on a portrait of a postman in his dark blue uniform trimmed with gold. A head like Socrates. Nonetheless Socratic for being somewhat addicted to liquor and having a high color as a result. An ardent Republican and a socialist, he reasons well and knows a lot of things. Roulin isn't quite old enough to be a father to me, but he has a tenderness for me, like an old soldier for a young one. He seems to be saying, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but however it turns out, think of me. It feels good coming from a man who is neither embittered, nor sad, nor happy, nor always perfectly just, but such a good soul, and so wise, and so full of feeling, and so trusting. Against a starry sky, a Belgian artist friend, Eugene Bach. At last, I have made a sketch of the picture I have dreamed of making, the poet. Nightlife was active in the river town, and Vincent knew its dance halls, brothels, and cafes. Some cafes stayed open all night. Sailors too drunk to walk or too poor to rent a room could slump over a table and stay all night. Vincent now had a room in the station hotel with a night cafe that he knew well. After a few bad weeks, he wrote to Theo, I've just had one of my best. Instead of getting depressed by the problem of paying the rent, I decided to handle it as a joke. I swore at the landlord, who really isn't a bad man, and said I'd get my revenge for all the money I'd overpaid by painting his rotten place. I've tried to show that the cafe is a place where you can ruin yourself, go crazy, commit crimes. So I stayed up 3 nights in a row painting and slept during the day. I often find the nighttime more alive and colorful than the day.
The Night Cafe is a drama with subplots and a cast of characters you come to know intimately. Vincent observes them, but without moral judgments. To heighten the drama, Van Gogh used color symbolically to convey feelings and ideas. Everywhere there is a clash of contrasts between different greens and reds, he said. I've tried to use red and green to express terrifying human passions. It contrasts, he says, with the soft, tender green of the counter, on which there is a pink nosegay.
As for getting back at the landlord, I'm not so sure it worked out as planned, because it's one of the ugliest pictures I ever made.
Leave the obvious vague, he said. Sleeping hoodlums in a sad, empty room, he wrote. The room is blood red and dark yellow. In pale sulfur, I have tried to create a devil's furnace in a low drinking hall. The lemon yellow lamps give off orange and green light. It was gaslight, of course. Leave the obvious vague, he said, but exaggerate the essential. You can feel the wood in your hand. You know how the splinters would feel if you walked here in bare feet. Who drank here? The fiery furnace and the power of darkness. But he also said, all this in an atmosphere of Japanese gaiety and the good humor of Tartarin. comedy enters the melodrama. Tartarin was a comedy character in the novels of Alphonse Daudet. Things become members of the cast. The leading character is the landlord. With his thumbs in his pockets, his posture reveals an accepting man. He makes no judgments upon others. Not such a bad man, Vincent said. The powers of darkness, terrifying human passions. The devil? A clash of contrasts, as Vincent said. In the night cafe, the big action of the evening is over. For us, the action is forever frozen.
When all Gaul was divided into 3 parts, this was the capital of one of the parts. Today, the center of Arles is called the Place de la République, but it was founded by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. This is the largest Colosseum outside Rome. Vincent saw bullfights here. Had people cared, they might have wondered why he ignored the spectacular ruins and turned to the modern iron bridge across the Rhone to the suburb of Trinquetaille. On a single gray morning, he made this painting of intricate geometry and perspective. Probably the most important structure in Vincent's life stood in front of this row of buildings. It isn't there anymore because it was bombed in World War II. It was a modest 2-story house which he had painted yellow. It stood in front of this building. He rented it in May and moved in September. Theo had inherited some money from an uncle and sent Vincent 300 francs. So he could afford to furnish it. On September 16th, he bought a mattress for 30 francs and spent his first night in the bedroom upstairs. The house on the left with the green shutters, I mean the one in the shadow of the tree, is the restaurant where I go for dinner every day. My friend the postman lives up the street. It is pure madness to go on living in those ruinous inns, he said.
He said he found the subject very difficult. He painted it as though from a position in mid-air.
Today's high-speed trains pass over the same viaduct. Later, he made a watercolor sketch of the painting to send to Theo, with different people in it. The Yellow House is where Gauguin would soon join Vincent and listen to his dream of founding a colony of artists in the South, with Gauguin at the head. He would welcome Gauguin with pictures of sunflowers all around his room. Like stained glass windows in a Gothic church, he wrote. Each flower is an independent personality, facing its own way. A colony of individuals in the South. Before Gauguin arrived, he wanted to have 30 large-size paintings. He had painted 10 and now added 5 more in a week. I'm nearly half dead from the past week's work. I've just slept 16 hours at a stretch. Next day, I'm all right again. My eyes are still tired, but then I had a new idea. Another size 30 canvas. My bedroom.
A simple room, treated with a thrusting perspective like a landscape. A room with a more complex shape than at first appears. A trapezoid, not a simple rectangle. It shows us Vincent's possessions and how he distributed them around the room. That's his portrait of Bach. Like sunflowers, each object is treated as an individual, with a little space around it. Everything in isolation from everything else. Vincent said it was a painting suggesting rest or sleep. Looking at the picture should rest the mind, he said. The pieces are simple, but it seems to take strong forces to hold them all together.
The room's occupant, waiting for Gauguin, painted himself as a Buddhist monk. I have made the eyes slightly slanting, like the Japanese. After months of negotiation, Gauguin arrived. One reason he came was that he, too, was penniless and depended on Theo for support. Self-portrait by Gauguin. Self-portrait by Van Gogh. For the next 2 months, they worked together, often in the same locations. Their influence on each other's work was unmistakable. Vincent had painted the canal. Gauguin painted the washerwomen. We are working hard, and our life together is going very well. Gauguin gives me the courage to imagine things, and certainly things from the imagination take on a more mysterious character.
Should color be realistic or symbolic? Vincent asked. Should you be a shoemaker in color or a musician? Should the background of a portrait be what the eye sees, or a color that says something about the subject?
The Arlesienne, in native costume, was the wife of the landlord in the night cafe. The Arlesienne were famous for their beauty. This is Gauguin's portrait of the same Madame Ginoux. Portrait of a Man by Vincent van Gogh. Actually the same Monsieur Ginoux from the night cafe, no longer with green hair. Our days pass in working all the time. And in the evening we are deadbeat and go off to the cafe. And after that, early to bed.
This was certainly not the case every night. But it is likely that Vincent painted the local dance hall from memory and imagination, influenced by Gauguin and others. The Japanese again. At a quick glance, you might wonder if this was a Van Gogh at all.
It does me good to have such intelligent company as Gauguin, he said. But our arguments are terribly electric, and sometimes we come away with our heads as exhausted as a used-up battery. The maddening Mistral wind, pouring down from the Alps, makes people act crazy, they say. relationship of the two artists survived many disputes, but no one could have predicted the events following a flare-up between them when Gauguin stormed off to a hotel. At 11:30 p.m. on December 23, 1888, Vincent went to a favorite brothel and presented Rachel with a part of his ear, which he had cut off with a razor. He didn't get to the hospital until the following day, after he was found lying in his bed, almost dead. He tells us that he had severed an artery. He had had the first of his many attacks, perhaps epilepsy, that plagued him for the rest of his days. It was Christmas. Gauguin summoned Theo from Paris. Theo wrote to his fiancée that there is little hope. Resigned to the worst, he left Vincent in the hospital, and Gauguin went back with him. But Vincent recovered. That is, he had good times and bad ones. Between attacks, he continued painting with undiminished clarity of vision. The motherly person in front of the wallpaper is the wife of his friend the postman, Mrs. Roulin. He painted her many times. With a rope to rock the cradle, he called her la berceuse, a word from lullaby, to mean motherliness. He wrote to his sister, "I have had 4 great crises when I had no idea what I had said or what I did. Now I'm going to an asylum in Saint-Remy, not far from here." Oh, my brother, sometimes I know exactly what I want. I can do very well without God in my life and in my painting, but ill as I am, I cannot do without something that is greater than me. That is my life, the power to create. And if a man is frustrated in his physical powers and tries to create thoughts instead of children, he is still part of humanity. He was confined in Saint-Remy for a year. During the attacks, I feel like a coward before the pain and suffering. I am now trying to recover like a man who, intending to commit suicide, finds the water too cold and tries to regain the bank. The treatment of patients in this hospital is easy because they do absolutely nothing. Vincent was allowed to work, and Theo sent him canvases and paint. Olive trees that seem like people.
What a queer thing touch is. The stroke of the brush.
He said he was finding things he'd been looking for years. I will consider myself happy if I can work enough to earn my living. It worries me that I have done so many pictures without ever selling one. He still spoke of courage, but his last attack, he said, was terrible. Theo was now married, and in January 1890, a son was born, and they named him Vincent Willem. It was time, yet again, to move on. Theo had been hoping to find a place where Uncle Vincent could live near them, under the care of a doctor. Their friend, the painter Pissarro, found the answer in a village outside Paris, the home of a Dr. Gogh, a friend of the Impressionists and a sympathetic man. Vincent liked Auvers and wrote that perhaps all he had was a malady of the South that would go away now.
He worried about losing his skills, but he never did. If there is something shaky about the church, it was deliberate. Everything was deliberate, including the faceless clock.
Dr. Gogh was a homeopath. The foxglove was the source of a drug he used to help Vincent, digitalis. But Vincent said, "We must not count on Dr. Gogh at all. In the first place, I think he is sicker than I am. When one blind man leads another, don't they both fall in the ditch?"
Knowing exactly what I wanted, though the brush nearly slipped from my fingers, I have painted 3 more big canvases. They are vast fields of wheat under troubled skies.
The field next to the cemetery, with 3 roads leading nowhere.
Here it wasn't difficult, he continued, to show sadness and extreme loneliness. His foreboding became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Here he shot himself, imperfectly but mortally. Two days later, with Theo at his side, he said, "I wish I could die now."